And we're live with another podcast. I am Mike.
I am Mitch.
Get into this and talk a little bit about free agency some more, as there's really nothing else going on in the league.
Yeah, there really hasn't been whole lot of news. I think we all expected the Eric Carlson situation to kind of settle itself out by now, but there really hasn't even been since we've last recorded any new news
It really
regarding
hasn't.
Carlson at all. So
It really seemed at the end of last week it started heating up. Like it was tweeted out by someone saying that there was a trade that was made with Tampa Bay, and then it was quickly died down, and nothing since.
Yeah, I think there was just this consensus around the league that it looked like it was Tampa Bay last weekend or this past weekend, but it looked like a deal maybe was done, but there's been nothing right now. And Catherine Tappan, that was the only person I've seen tweet anything lately about it, and said this morning that the Lightning are still in talks with the Senators, and that they're still looking to potentially send someone out elsewhere and maybe a trade before they'd make a Carlson deal.
I just feel like
to shed some salary.
Them making a trade would just be so much, like to have to move just to be able to get the trade made, just because of all the cap issues that the Lightning have.
There's a lot when it goes into a deal with Tampa Bay. There's a lot that goes into it, just in terms of the fact that not only can they not really take on, or they can't take on at all, Bobby Ryan. So any deal with Eric Carlson looks like Bobby Ryan will have to be involved. So it'd probably have to be a 3-team trade. Yeah. There's been talks of the Rangers, Devils, whomever would be able to take that salary. So you have to deal with that, along with the fact that even just with Carlson alone, at the moment, Tampa Bay just can't afford him. So they would also have to, either before or also included in this deal, send some salary elsewhere, Tyler Johnson, someone like that. It's very complicated. But since there's no real news on that front right now, we move on to some of the guys who are still available in terms of free agency, maybe in trade, and it's looking pretty thin at the moment.
Yeah, it seems like the top people kind of went in that first day, but we still don't know where Rick Nash is going to go. Steve Mason, since he has been bought out, there's who knows if someone needs a goalie. Obviously, the Islanders signed Robin Lehner last week.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the goaltending market, you look at a guy like Steve Mason. Craig Anderson's also reportedly asked for a trade from the Ottawa Senators. So there's still a couple guys out there. Yeah. But
I'm also trying to think of teams that need goaltending right now. And I'm assuming they both would want to go to a team that's contending.
Yeah, so it's a difficult situation just because of the fact that, like, there were a lot of goaltenders already available.
Yeah.
And they've kind of already, like you said, Robin Lehner signed with the Islanders. That was a big one that there was a potential landing spot for a free agent goalie.
Yeah, that was just a 1 year, $1.5 million. And Mason's probably going to want a big contract, and I don't know what you can get out of Craig Anderson in trade.
So there's not a whole lot of landing spots left.
There's obviously Lettinen too, but his not what he was before, and his cap hits 5.9 is a little much. This
past season, I mean, Lettinen for a while has not been worth that contract that he used to have, that $5.9 million. He was rumored to, at least there was potential of them buying him out. There was a lot of different rumors surrounding the Stars and Lettinen in terms of what they were going to do to try to shed that salary, and nobody wanted him in a deal. They didn't want to extend his deal any longer with a buyout. So they just let him stay, and he had a decent season. I mean, he had a .912 save percentage. So I still think that there should be a market for the guy, but at the moment, nothing.
Nobody knows what Rick Nash is doing. He obviously said before that he was considering retiring just because of his injuries and everything.
Exactly.
But there's always a chance he might come back.
Yeah,
which would be a big help for anyone who's wanting to contend and wants a big winger.
Yeah, so he's someone who, if he does decide, and there's no real timetable on that, it's not really known when he's going to be making that decision. So if he does decide that he wants to play in the NHL, there's obviously going to be a lot of teams interested in his services. It was reported that as many as 10 teams had at least reached out to Rick Nash prior to July 1st, and he told them that, like you just said, that he was considering retirement and he didn't want to kind of lead these teams the wrong way and have these talks now, and would rather make the decision and then and then talk to these teams.
Right. I know he's restricted, but there's still Mark Stone, who hasn't been signed by Ottawa yet. But that's probably because they're focused more on trying to trade Carlson than anything else right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people saw that as a potential, that rare offer sheet could potentially go in there, just because the Senators obviously are a team that's not looking to add any money.
No.
And he's someone who's a top line guy. He would be worth a big contract, and the Senators are also a team who's rebuilding, so
True.
they could also just be okay with the compensation they'd get in terms of picks from the offer sheet. Although Mark Stone did file for arbitration, meaning that he's no longer eligible for an offer sheet, so that's not something that's really available for him.
But there really isn't much top free agents out there. There's
I mean, Patrick,
Orpik, but there's not.
Yeah, Patrick Maroon's probably the top guy left.
Yeah.
There have been reports that maybe he signed with the Blues the past couple days, but that still hasn't really been picked up by a bigger name. So it appears as though he's still trying to narrow it down between a couple different teams. Although the Blues seem to be the team that's at least most rumored to be interested in his services.
And throughout free agency so far, I know we talked about this a little bit last time, but the Islanders seem to be one of the teams that's most the busiest. But that's probably because they just lost Tavares, so they're trying to rebuild on the center depth and everything. So they're trying to do whatever they can to fill that gap.
They're obviously, like you said, with the John Tavares situation, they're trying anything they can to just add pieces and kind of change the narrative of their offseason and I guess next season show off these new additions as opposed to the big loss that they had. They signed Jan Kovar. I'm not exactly sure on the pronunciation
and
of
Ross
that one.
Johnston, but he's just a guy who'd probably go to the
Johnston's more of a he's more of a tweener guy between AHL and NHL.
Exactly.
His numbers,
even the AHL weren't really that great. He hasn't really turned out to be anything yet since.
So he's more of a minor signing for them, although 4 years is certainly interesting.
It is,
in terms of,
but they have been
length
making some interesting decisions.
Yeah, the Kovar signing, he's a guy who over his KHL career is about a point per game.
Yeah,
he was pretty well over a point per game the past few seasons in the KHL. This past season, he only had 35 points in 54 games, so it was definitely a down spell for him last season. But he's someone who impressed at the Olympics for the Czech Republic. It was rumored, I believe earlier this week, that he was going to sign in the NHL, and there were a number of teams that were interested in him. He's 28 years old. He's a centerman. He's a guy who will probably slot in the second or third line role as a center for the Islanders, and he's a 1 year, $2 million. It's nothing. It's really, a little gamble. Yeah. At the end of the day, the Islanders have a lot of cap space at the moment, and this is a guy who, if he plays really well, maybe you can sign him to a longer term deal. And,
True.
And if he doesn't work out, it's $2 million for a team that, like I just said, has a lot of cap space. So it's a really low risk signing for them. True. And it's one that I think that they should be making in the situation that they're in.
I agree. Just because losing Tavares is so huge for them, because now they have such a big role to fill.
Yeah.
Not even just that, because now they have to find a new captain who takes over that captaincy.
Yeah, so there's a lot of
questions for them to make or answer.
Yeah, and a guy like Kovar is even someone who, at the deadline, a team could be looking for a middle six center if he's playing well, and obviously with that low cap hit, even those teams that are close to the cap, that are close to the cap ceiling, they can fit him underneath.
True.
Even with possibly some retention from the Islanders. And looking past that, I mean, in terms of unrestricted free agents, I mean, like you said, Brooks Orpik at 37, he's got pretty.
He hasn't really done
left.
anything since he left Pittsburgh, so it's not really anything there.
Dan Hamhuis is still a decent defenseman. He's someone who you could on a Stanley Cup contender, you'd probably want him on your bottom pair, but he's still someone who could probably fill in a top four on an average to below average team. There's a guy like Scott Hartnell, who we obviously have some experience watching as Flyers fans. Who 24 points in 62 games last year. It's not awful.
Terrible, but
I mean he's
older, so
Yeah,
Yeah,
I expect eventually, maybe later in the next month or so, he'll sign a smaller deal with a team that's possibly in contention for a cup, and they'll have him just like at the end of this past season with the Predators, where he spent some time in the press box, but every once in a while you throw him into the lineup. He's someone who
he wanted to go back to where he was before anyway. So
he's someone who still has that ability to he's a physical player.
Yeah.
So even if you're looking for that kind of boost to your team,
they're trying to add that, but because the NHL is changing so much, his value isn't as much, but still there's value in him having him.
Yeah, he's when you look at there's always teams that are looking for that physical presence to inject in their lineup every once in a while, have in the press box most of the time, and then throw him into the lineup just for a one game to change the face of your team's on a losing streak. But he's also someone who, like we said, 24 points in 62 games. He still has some ability.
Yeah.
In
he's always a guy who's going to try to get in front of the net and tip one.
So you could even throw him in.
And we even saw when he was in Philadelphia, just trying to recreate that with Shen and then Couturier, just that quick shot that
that
Giroux
slot
likes
spot
to
he
do.
always plays in on the power play. So yeah, he's still someone who has some value. I think he'll definitely. I don't think this is a situation where he'll retire.
No.
I think he will get picked up by a team eventually. And then there's a lot of depth defensemen here, like Toby Enstrom or Lucas Spiza.
Yeah.
And it's a whole lot of seventh defensemen available. I think a lot of these guys will eventually get signed. One guy who I thought maybe would have a little bit more interest, and obviously we're at July 9th now, so is Nick Shore. I thought Nick Shore potentially, I mean, he's a guy who he's kind of moved around a little bit. He was with Calgary this past season. He spent some time with the Kings. He did well in the AHL. He has struggled some in the NHL, although I don't know how big of a shot he's been given.
Yeah, true.
He's definitely a guy who has some skill. He's 25 years old, so as an unrestricted free agent especially, he's very young. He had 18 points in 64 games this past season. I think he's a guy who, if given the chance, I think he could outproduce the kind of contract that he'd be getting. He's someone who would be getting under $1 million a year most likely. I think he's the type of guy who teams should be looking for in terms of their bottom six. Someone who is able to still produce offensively that can forecheck.
True.
Instead of those bigger guys.
But then there's just to turn this to the Flyers a little bit, but there's also Matt Reed available. Do you think at some point he would ever get picked up by a team? I mean, I know for the past couple of years he hasn't really done much with the Flyers, but this past year when he was up, he didn't play terribly.
Yeah,
he had a very vital role in the Flyers. They put him at first line at times. He was helped at penalty kill and everything.
I think a team who perhaps struggles on the penalty kill, maybe in training camp they have an injury to a key penalty kill guy. I think he is someone who could get picked up for that. I think at the end of the day, I think he will get picked up by someone, even just in the same role that he was with the Flyers this season, like you said, where he even spent some time in the AHL.
Yeah, and that's where he spent most of the year.
If he's willing, I think he is someone who could just be the captain of an AHL team, someone who a team likes to have just as that kind of role model of someone who, like, he was signed by the Flyers when I think he was 25.
Yeah, he's 32
out of
now.
college, so he's someone who has that kind of story where he could maybe inspire a group of young guys who might not think they have a shot in the league, but they can look to him as a role model, as someone who made it despite circumstances that didn't necessarily make it likely that he was going to be the player that he became.
Yeah.
And past that, there's Logan Shaw, Tommy Wingles. There's a lot of
Joel
fourth-line
Ward.
guys. Yeah, there are fourth-line guys who I think will get picked up, but very close to league minimum deals.
Yeah, they shouldn't be getting too much.
And
then there's also the news that came out over the weekend was talking signings-wise, but the Flyers re-signed Lyon for 2 years.
Yeah, Alex Lyon, a lot of people have kind of they've said that maybe they want to use him as the backup for the Flyers. I'm not necessarily a big proponent of that. I think his numbers, I think people were surprised at how well he did, because his first stint with the Flyers at the start of the season, he just looked he couldn't even get post to post.
No.
And
well,
by
even
the end of the year, he he won them some games. He didn't play
Yeah.
too poorly. He outplayed Peter Mrazek at times.
And
But
even at times he had like bad luck, and just like even the game in Boston where he let up the goal in like the last couple seconds after he was on his head for most of the time.
So he had a 905 save percentage. It's just not very good. He's not the type of guy who I want as the backup, and I think if he was the backup for the Flyers, we've seen that Dave Haxtell likes to ride a single goaltender, and I think he wouldn't have very much trust in Alex Lyon, so I think he would play Brian Elliott would assumedly
be playing
be the
even
starter
more
there.
than what he was
He would
playing
play
last
him
year.
even more. Yeah, exactly. So I don't really see that as an option. But as someone who, with the likely injury of Michael Neuvirth
or Brian Elliott,
either or as two older guys, I think he's a fine
he's a
AHL
fun,
call
to
up.
bring up.
Yeah, I
Even
don't.
Stolarz,
I think Stolarz with this signing a 2-year deal, I still would not be surprised whatsoever if Anthony Stolarz doesn't play another game for a Flyers affiliate and even the Phantoms.
Because both of them aren't really high in the Flyers goaltending.
Not in their future plans. Alex Lyon.
I mean, unless one can play really well, where a team might think about trading for him or something. But even then, that's probably a long shot.
Yeah, I know he had that giant performance in the AHL playoffs, which is I think where most people came after that performance. They thought we need this guy in the NHL. He played so well. But even if you look at his numbers, he had a .911 save percentage with the Phantoms last season, which is average to slightly below average. Like he's not someone who's lighting the world on fire.
Even next year, he's going to be spending time with Hart.
Yeah, so he's not even. I don't even think he's going to be getting the majority of the starts.
I mean, it was only for $750,000, so it wasn't that much.
Oh,
so
I'm not.
It's nothing bad with the signing. It's just
I have no problem with the signing whatsoever. I really do think that he's a guy who they can throw up in the NHL for maybe 10 games if there are injuries to either of the starting goalies, which there will be. I have no problem with that whatsoever.
You just hope it's not another situation like last year where we had to go out and actually trade for a goalie because both of them are out for so long.
Yeah, I think Lyon proved that won't be necessary this season, even if there are 2 injuries to the starting goalies, to both Neuvirth and Elliott. I think Lyon proved that he can step into that role and be a guy who they can trust for a short period of time. If it's longer term, yes, I think they would then acquire a goaltender. But he is someone who I would trust with a short leash.
Yeah, but I guess we can turn it a little to Columbus and Artemi Panarin.
Yeah, Artemi Panarin. There's been talks for the past couple weeks of. There have been reports, at least, that he was not interested, at least right now, in signing a contract extension with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Rumors of potentially maybe they'd want to trade him because of that. Obviously, there are some big names reporting this, including Elliot Friedman and Darren Dreger. So obviously, this is something we believe, but it's come even more to the forefront and something Columbus needs to figure out when the Athletic, Aaron Portzline of the Athletic Columbus interviewed his agent Daniel Milstein about Artemi Panarin, and he did not make it sound very good. The likelihood that he stays.
He wouldn't want to re-sign back there once his contract's up next season. After next season.
Yeah, he did not make it sound great. He complimented the team. He complimented the coaches.
He just really wants to play for like a big city team.
Yeah, he even said he's quoting. He said that's basically the message in this, quoting what Panarin's thought process is. I don't know if I want to be here for the next 8 years, which does not sound very good.
No, it does not.
It's something where it's a problem when you look at teams like a Columbus, like a Winnipeg, although Winnipeg isn't necessarily in this position now, although they may have been in that Paul Stastny situation.
True.
These small market teams, when a player of Artemi Panarin's standard has the ability to choose any team that he wants, for as much as Columbus is a good team, they're a young team who's getting better. A big part of signing with the team is living in a city, and
Right.
And Columbus just does not have that.
That's why he was
that
just
kinda
playing
draw.
Chicago and a biggest city in the U.S. that he would just
Yeah,
then
so-
go into Columbus. It's different.
Yeah, so he's obviously someone who that
Mhm.
matters to, and for Columbus, there's really nothing you can do.
No.
And there's been rumors that maybe it's possibly that he wants more of a that bigger cities have more of a Russian contingent just in the city in general, more of a Russian community,
Yeah.
whereas Columbus likely doesn't have very many Russian people in it in general. So for Panarin, I think it makes sense. If I was a Columbus Blue Jackets fan, I would not be very happy.
No.
He even said, his agent even said that this is nothing about the fans in
Or
Columbus.
the team or anything like
Yeah,
that.
it's just the city. It's just
yeah.
a small market team, and that's the problem you run into when you expand to cities like Columbus, where they just don't have that
Right.
major metropolitan culture area, just any of that. And I think it's something that they just need to trade him.
Yeah. At least don't do what the Islanders did, where you have him and lose him for nothing. Try to get something out of him if he doesn't really want to come here.
Yeah, and
But if you think maybe he could be an asset to us trying to compete this next year, I don't know.
You consider it, but I think this is something where, at least for the Tavares situation, John Tavares made it sound, at least afterward,
Right, that he
talking
was
to Toronto
considering
media.
maybe coming back.
Yeah, he told the Islanders that he still thought that there was a good chance that he might come back. And at the end of the day, he decided that he wanted to go to Toronto. But these comments publicly just sound to me like someone who doesn't want to have the major negative attention of saying, trade me, or I don't want to sign here. And even maybe it's him saying, like, I just want to be nice. I don't want, I've enjoyed my time here. I like the organization.
Yeah.
Trade me so you get something for me because I'm not staying.
Right.
And I think it's just something they have to do. And they could get a lot for him.
They could. And then they also have the situation with Bobrovsky, too.
Yeah. This one is a little less reported on, but Kevin Weeks of NHL Network did tweet something to the extent of that Sergei Bobrovsky may not want to re-sign in Columbus. Obviously, with him, it's not as much known why, because there just haven't been as many reports. It could also just be a similar situation as Panarin, where it's Columbus. There's not
or
a
maybe
lot of
he's
Russian
thinking
people there.
this team isn't the team that I could possibly contend with.
I mean, yeah, he could also be saying, like, I know Artemi wants to leave, so if he leaves, what do we have
Or
here?
maybe he's more of him thinking, what can I possibly see at the open market?
Yeah,
Maybe
it could
it's
be a money
similar to Tavares, where he's not sure, but he wants to see what's out there.
Yeah, I think, and Kevin Weeks is someone who doesn't necessarily break news. Generally, but he is someone he was a former NHL goalie, and he seems to have contacts among goaltenders in the NHL. So he is someone who I would trust his opinion on this. And it's just I'm not sure. I don't know if this is if it's something that he's just waiting like Tavares, where he wants to at least hear other teams out. I'm not sure. And with a goaltender, you also have to consider the fact that long-term deals just
have never really worked out.
Yeah, those big contracts with a guy like Henrik Lundqvist or Carey Price,
Ilya Bryzgalov, Flyers-wise, just thinking of that.
They have not worked out.
No.
So maybe it's also a little bit of Columbus, just not, at least at the moment, they're not willing to pay as much as Bobrovsky feels he's worth. So yeah, there's a lot of different different obstacles.
At $7.425 million, I don't know.
Yeah, so
I mean, that's not bad for a goalie to make that much.
That's relatively high.
Yeah.
I don't know how much higher Columbus
unless he wants
is
to get
willing
up to
go.
the $8 million or whatever.
I would assume that
because I don't think a goalie should want, or a team would want to pay the same to what Carey Price has.
Yeah, Carey Price makes over $11 million a year, and that contract starts now and runs until he's 39 years old.
I mean, he is due for a good contract because he always has the trophies and everything.
He's a great goalie.
Yeah.
But you also could take away from the fact that he's never really performed well in the playoffs. I mean, even
True.
dating back to when he was with the Flyers, that this whole Bobrovsky thing, him leaving the Flyers, really started when Peter Laviolette benched him. Not only benched him, but sent him into the press box during the playoffs just because he was not playing well. And I believe that was 08-09. Or sorry, not 08-09, 11-12.
Yeah.
So, Bobrovsky, it's a situation, obviously, it's a little less clear than the Panarin.
Yeah. But, I mean,
situation.
at 29, you don't really know what his 30s could give you.
Yeah. Goaltending-wise, it's... The aging curve is weird. Like, generally...
And for someone of his stature, I don't know how his flexibility will run as he's later in his career.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, too. But for goalies... generally, they start in the NHL later. They also, like Henrik Lundqvist, how old is he? He's like 35, 36, 37.
Something like that.
So for some guys, they're just able to play for longer. But others, I mean, they could fall off a
36.
cliff. Yeah, he's 36 years old, and he's still one of the best goaltenders in the NHL. So for Bobrovsky, he's of that ilk in terms of at least the prime of his career, the number of Vezinas he's won. So maybe he is someone who, if you give him a 6 or 7, $8 million or 8-year contract, would be able to play at an elite level throughout. But it's just something you don't know. It's a question that no team can really answer until it just plays out.
Right.
So yeah, at least in terms of if he did hit the open market,
and if they lose both of them, that just kind of messes up everything for Columbus.
Yeah, they have to. It's one of those situations where you just have to approach these guys and just say, like, is there any wiggle room here?
Yeah.
Like at a certain point, obviously Panarin, it was also said in that interview that he doesn't necessarily not want to play there, and this doesn't necessarily mean that he won't sign an extension, but he's having these questions.
Right.
So you have to, at a certain point, confront him and say, what's the deal here? Are you signing or not? So
what would it take for you to stay?
Yeah.
Essentially.
So I think that's a conversation they need to have with both Panarin and Bobrovsky.
Because if they lose both of them in an already kind of hard division that the Metropolitan is, one of the more question marks of whoever can make it because it's so close between the teams, you want those guys.
And they're a team who I don't think it wouldn't be an Islanders-esque situation.
No.
Just in terms of the fact that Columbus is a relatively young team.
Right.
So I think they would be able to dig themselves out of this hole, especially if they made the trades.
Yeah, they probably do it better than
probably
the Islanders will. But
yeah, because the Islanders not only didn't get anything in return for John Tavares, but he was pretty much the whole team.
But they tried everything they could to try to get him to stay, but it just didn't work out for them.
Exactly. So it's a situation to definitely to definitely watch.
Right.
And in terms of just bringing it back to the Flyers, obviously I would be interested in either of these players. Panarin's one of the best wingers in the NHL. Sergei Bobrovsky, obviously one of the best goalies in the NHL. I'm not sure what his level of interest is.
I know his
Flyers.
ending of the Philadelphia wasn't the best for him, but if he
requested
comes, he'd easily be the number one go-to.
Yeah,
you could easily throw Elliott as 2.
Yeah, he's the question mark that was the reason why he asked for a trade is because he wasn't being used as a starter. Yeah. So you could also come back and say that he's the starter. He's obviously the starter. They would give him starter money. Obviously,
we're doing everything we could to try to compete now. So if they did at least offer him something, let's see what he says.
But obviously, I don't know how realistic either of those are.
But if they were to keep him, then that changes everything because they'll be right where they were this past year. Probably 3rd, maybe Metro. Yeah,
Columbus. I think if they hang on to both of these guys for this season, they are right there with the Flyers. I think they're just about as close of a team to the Flyers, even just in terms of roster construction, but also just where they are at this point.
Right.
So yeah, I could see. It depends. Is Sergei Bobrovsky going to be a Vezina-worthy goaltender, or is he going to have just he never really has a big down year, but it depends on if he's standing on his head the entire season. If he is, they could even challenge a team like Washington or Pittsburgh for one of those top 2 spots,
like they were 2 years ago.
Exactly. So I think They're a team who will probably. I think they're definitely going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
At least if those two are
Mhm.
there. But
They
it'll
could
go
even make the playoffs if they trade them at like the deadline or something like that. I could still see them maybe pushing at least wild card at that point, but they could still possibly make it.
Yeah, I think if they trade Panarin and get a good return for him, at least in terms of players that are obviously on the NHL roster now, I think they could still push. Bobrovsky, I think, is a bigger hole to fill, just because, I mean, Jonas Korpisalo is their backup.
Unless you
He's
bring
a young guy, but
unless you bring back Steve Mason.
I think that's one of those situations again where he might not be too happy with that organization.
Yeah.
But no one signed back there. So yeah, it's another situation to watch out for. I don't think it's something that's going to. I think the Karlsson situation could come to a head very quickly.
Yeah.
I think one offer could change things there. In terms of the Panarin and Bobrovsky situations, I think they're much more likely to go out into the season. And
I could see it going
potentially
either way with Karlsson. It could be something dealt with right away, or end of the preseason or training or off season, or they just keep him and he hits free agency.
Yeah, I think they'd be foolish not to trade him, because obviously it's not going to happen. He's not going to resign. I could definitely see it being pushed to the trade deadline. Past there, I just think they would have to be very foolish to let him just walk without acquiring anything.
Right.
So
for your best player that you're going to get out of anyone else you could trade, you have to make some kind of move with them.
Yeah, especially as a team, like we said before, that is rebuilding, and the pieces that they would get for him would certainly help in a rebuild, and just losing him for nothing is not going to help anyone.
No, it's not.
So yeah, I think that's.
I guess we'll see what happens, but until then, I guess that's where we'll end it for today.
Yeah.